Hi, welcome to Rondo Coach. Today we'll talk about the anatomy of the soccer brain, in particular the youth soccer brain, how it works, what it takes to actually become a great soccer player, and how to actually train it. What are the limitations? So let's get right into it. So let's define a couple of terms before we can actually go and analyze how they fit into the um, youth soccer brain. So, what is a sports action? It consists of three elements: gathering, decision making, and execution. Okay, so for example, let's take poker as a quasi sport. The gathering would be the looking at the cards. The decision making would be deciding to fold, check, and raise. And the execution is how we communicate the decision to the dealer. Similarly, for tennis, the data gathering section, you look at the opponent decision. The decision making is that we decide to hit the ball diagonally, for example, and the execution is actually hitting the ball. Okay, so now let's look at soccer actions, for example. Let's look at a simple striking the ball, right? You want to go and actually shoot the ball at the goal. So the data gathering is you look at the teammates, so you look at the ball, you look at the opponents, the goalie, and all of that. The decision making is you decide to actually shoot the ball, and finally the execution is striking of the ball. Another soccer action, for example, is passing of the ball. So it's a similar thing. You look at the opponents, the teammates, the ball, your position, and so forth. Um, in the data gathering section, for decision making, you decide to pass the ball, and finally, on the execution, you um, pass the ball. Okay, so a couple more soccer actions. Let's say, for example, this one is without a ball. You look at the teammates, you look at the opponents, you look where the ball is, and you decide to run into space to open up to receive the ball. So that's the decision making, and the final thing is you actually just run, right? There's no um, interaction with the ball at this point. And finally, one more soccer action is actually receiving the ball, right? You look at the teammates and opponents and all of that, but you also look at the ball. The ball is coming towards you, or you see that your teammate is about to strike the ball. So you decide to receive the ball, and finally, you receive the ball by doing a movement with your foot to go and receive the ball in the direction that you want. So let's put all of this thing together. Let's analyze this simple one-two pass, right? We started with you can see over here get data gathering of all the teammates and position, and we decided even here that if everything works well, we'll go and pass the ball because our teammate is open. So we decide to pass the ball. We pass the ball while the ball is actually traveling, right? We decide that we are already going to move to the next place, which is, we run into space to go and receive the ball. So we do that. And while we are receiving the ball, we are also data gathering for the next action, which is, actually receiving the ball, right? Just because we ran into space, it doesn't mean that we're going to receive the ball. Finally, we do, let's say, a one touch, and then because we see that, we're our teammates and we see a clear opportunity to score a goal, we decide to shoot on the goal. So if we actually go and layer these multiple soccer actions over here, you can see that they clearly overlap. While we are deciding to pass, right, we keep gathering data of what else is happening, and while we're passing, we already decide to move into space, right? What is the next? What is the next? um, movement. And then while we are running into space, we need to see if we are actually going to receive the ball. If we don't receive the ball, we might actually do something else. We might stop, we might come back, we might actually do something else rather than receiving the ball, right? So we keep feeding this information over and over again to see what's next. Then finally, we decided to shoot. So unlike some of the other sports, as we were talking earlier about like poker or something like that, right? Um, in this particular case, we actually don't pause and think all the time, right? Very often it just keeps happening over and over again. And it's very important to understand that. It's very important to understand because you can see that some of these things, like running, comes natural. Striking the ball, maybe not, especially for a completely new player, right? So we can classify these things of something like running or looking, right? Seeing, breathing, as what we call fast system one mode of thought. And then this other one that you need to deliberately think and overthink is what we call slow or system two. It's important because we can understand that there are some things in system one and some things in system two. System one processes are, comparing distances or walking or driving a car, riding a bike, washing hands, writing dictations, like somebody's dictating and you're just taking notes without much thinking, calculating one plus one. You don't really need to think about it. System two, they're slow, deliberate. You really need to focus. You need to stop doing other things, right? So an example of this will be writing a letter or creating a joke or memorizing a number, calculating something complex like 12 times 23. You really need to think about it. You know the process, but you need to think about it. Or parallel parking, right? For those things, you kind of like stop, think about it, and then continue. Now let's look at system one processes and let's think about the fact how they get to system one. Were they always in system one? I don't think so. Most of these things are not things that actually were always there, right? Like weren't born knowing how to walk or drive a car or ride a bike, right? They used to be in system two, but somehow they got into system one, right? At different ages, we learn how to do something so well that we don't actually need to, think about it, and we just end up doing things, right? And slowly they move from system two to system one by repetitive controlled practice. So that makes us think about stuff, right? In soccer, for example, there's some things that are in system one for a professional soccer player, and probably they're not in system one for, a complete novice, right? Uh, Probably the youth player that just never played soccer can still run, right? Run into space, or it can observe where people are at, right? The If people are like, what is scanning, right? It's like just looking, observing where people are at, right? Behind you or in front of you and so forth. But what happens is that they need to become natural for players. And by natural, what we really mean is not that they're born with it. It basically means that they move from system two to system one, right? Receiving the ball, striking the ball, dropping a shoulder, receiving with back foot. Like professional soccer players don't think about these things, right? Checking the shoulder, pointing for a ball, or scanning, right? These things are something that are natural, or they're not natural as in they're born with it, but they actually learn them so well that they're almost feels like inborn, right? And this is specific for soccer players. So they're not going to be able to do other players like basketball players. They have some advantage, but they're not going to have these things in system one processes. System two doesn't end up being empty. People are not running mindlessly, right? What is actually system two? Analyzing opponents weaknesses, finding teammate strengths, understanding the result and the mentality we need to go and adopt to actually be better players. So all of these things are happening, right, deliberately, whether the player decides to do it or instructions from the coach and so forth, all or teammates. All of these things are in system two, and they will remain in system two, so they'll never move to system one. So now the real question is, how do we actually move things from system two to system one, right? We're talking about riding a bike or walking, and you hear this term called muscle memory. But what does it even mean? How can we move things from system two to system one so we can really focus deliberately only on certain things and not feel overwhelmed? So muscle memory, right? It's not actually anything stored in the muscle, right? It's stored in the motor cortex part of the brain, right? And is developed in a process called myelination. What it really means is that it's a coordination of very complex, um, you know, signals that are being sent from our brain to our muscles, right, to perform a complex motor skill with our muscles, right? And once they're built into our um, brain, into our motor cortex, right, they will be controlled. They will fire exactly as they were trained, and they will actually we can do them pretty much subconsciously, or we're not going to really think, oh, this is how we're going to move, our toes, how we're going to move our ankles, how we're going to move our knee, our hip, our hand, our arm, elbow, neck, and so forth, right? We're going to really think, okay, this is what we want to do, and the rest of it is just built into our brains. In contrast, right, we're talking about things that will never move, and those are like the soccer tactics or directions from the coach or anything that we actually figured out. For example, oh, the opponent is a left-footed rather than right-footed, or maybe just prefers both feet, so we cannot actually rely heavily on one of them. Those things cannot be built in, right? We have to go and really think about it and really focus and really think of what is happening, what is not fitting in, and then go and deliberately think of a hypothesis, and then we go and prove it. But it really has to go and be deliberate thinking. They will never be stored as a muscle memory in our brains. Now you might think that once something moves from system 2 to system 1, it's always there. Well, not really. What really we need to think about is that there are different levels of each motor skill, right? And depending on the level, the actions can move between system 1 and system 2. For example, let's say that you have unlimited space and the ball comes slowly to you and you never played soccer. Well, you can think through it and basically go and perform it after a couple of tries. Maybe grown up 10 tries is enough, right? They can actually pretty much perform it without much thinking. They can go and chat with their neighbor or whoever it is, right? So that's level 1. However, let's say that you have limited space and the ball is coming faster, right? So it's much harder to go and do this thing. Well, you really need to be alert of where your muscles are, stay on your toes and all that. That doesn't become natural for somebody who hasn't played soccer. So the ball comes in, you really need to think about it. Over time, even that thing is it becomes natural maybe, and you don't really think about it, and you can go and kind of like just go through the motions. Now let's add a little bit more complexity. Let's say that there's a person behind you, an opponent that is trying to take the ball away from you, right? All of a sudden, your body posture and your arm cannot just stay there, right? You have to go and protect the space, making sure that the opponent doesn't come in front of it, and so forth. So these are just levels and levels and levels of how actually which process actually is in system 1 and which process is in system 2. And over time, or with practice and increased intensity, they can move from system 2 to system 1 as the complexity evolves. But they will never be just like one place, depending on what the complexity is. And this brings us probably to one of the most important things. Of what is the role of a soccer coach, right? When we are coaching soccer actions, what are we actually coaching? What we're really doing is we are creating an environment where players can experience overloading soccer situations so that the players can adapt their pre-existing soccer skills in an increased pressure of time and space. What does it mean? It means that there's something, right, that is probably existing in system 1 with very low pressure, with very low intensity, right, unlimited space and so forth, right? They're in system 1, it's basically natural to go and receive a ball or shoot a ball, right? And all of a sudden we are saying, well, you know what, we're going to add a little bit of intensity, we're going to add a little bit of limitation of space and time. We're going to add an opponent. We're going to add limited space, maybe multiple. Maybe you need to go and sprint for the ball rather than just like place the ball and wait for it. This is not just penalty shootouts, right? We're going to add a goalkeeper. We're going to add multiple teammates where you need to actually even make a decision which way you're going to go. Multiple players are moving and so forth, right? So we are increasing that intensity so we can actually move just one level, not multiple levels, but just one level from system 2 to system 1. How are we going to do that? By controlled repetition, right? We are repeating the same movement pretty much all the time, right? We cannot go and just freely play and experience different things, because then we don't know what we are practicing, right? So it has to have some controlled repetition multiple times so that we can actually experience that movement from system 2 to system 1, only one level at a time, not multiple levels. So now we are thinking about like how does it look if you're actually coaching something and the players don't have that anything in system 1, right? The simplest thing, right? We were talking about like running, right? If the players cannot run, how are you going to teach running to space at the right time, at the right pace and so forth? You cannot really coach that, right? So there has to be something in system 1 to start with that. If there's literally nothing in system 1, there's no pre-existing skills of some skill of some particular action, or we're trying to jump, 3 levels above, right? How are we going to go and coach, crossing, if the player, cannot even, receive the ball, or cannot actually strike it pretty much at all, right? It can lift the ball from the ground. How are we going to coach it? We cannot. What's going to happen at that point? We're going to have this, creating of these incorrect neural paths. So what's going to happen is that the player is going to start maybe, toe poking the ball, which is fine if they want to score a goal from nearby. But if our goal is to coach crossing, if they don't have literally anything, if their level is too low, maybe we shouldn't add the extra complexity. Maybe we shouldn't add the defender if the person cannot cross without the defender, right? So it's up to the soccer coach, not to the player, not to the environment, not to the parents, but to the soccer coach to determine the level and dose the intensity correctly, so we actually create correct neural paths. The second part, what's going to happen is that what the player is going to do if there's no pre-existing condition or pre-existing skill there, is going to keep doing incorrect decisions all the time. So let's say, the player doesn't know how to shoot with their weaker foot, right? They cannot shoot if there's no intensity, even anything, or they cannot pass, they cannot receive the ball at all. And all of a sudden we start adding defenders. Like, oh, we have to add defenders, otherwise it's not soccer. Well, that player will not ever probably attempt to receive it with their weaker foot, let alone do it correctly. They will not even attempt it. They will default in unnatural situations, in unnatural position postures, to receive it with the still with the stronger foot, because their weaker foot is so weak that they're never actually going to go and develop it at all. So they're going to have one foot that keeps coming from level 2 to level 3 and so forth, while the other foot is still at level 0 essentially. So it's up to the coach to understand, what are we actually going to coach over here to have the pre-existing skill and then build on top of it. The final thing is that what's going to happen is that if you keep putting, players into, too difficult situations where they're not actually developing their weaker skills, is, in addition to not actually developing what they need to develop at that point, they will be so frustrated and they will give up, right? Because they cannot see the path. I can see the path. You can see the path as a soccer coach. Parents can see the path very often because they've seen, kids developing, but they cannot see it. And if they don't believe that the path is there, if the players don't believe, it will never happen. The player has to believe that there's a path in order to give them up. So this was a little longer video, and a little bit theoretical. So let's just recap quickly, of what we talked about. We talked about the data gathering, the decision making, the execution as 3 pillars of the soccer actions, how they overlap. We went through an example of a one-two pass, and how that fits in there. And then we talked a little bit more about the system one and system two, thought processes. And finally, how that fits actually into coaching, right? How do we actually move skills to become motor skills, to become system one skills, so we actually can really enable our players to go and do what they need to do, which is, think faster, act faster, and make the right decision as often as they can. Um, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you come all the way here, it means probably that the video was pretty solid for you. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, and it's going to help us make more videos like this one. Thank you.